Israel's legitimacy is rooted in history, international law, and the right to self-determination. The Jewish people have maintained a continuous presence in the land for thousands of years, and after centuries of persecution, they legally re-established their homeland through the UN's 1947 partition plan. Despite immediate rejection and attacks from neighboring states, Israel survived and thrived, becoming a beacon of democracy in the Middle East. Israel is not just a state, it is the fulfillment of a people's right to exist in their ancestral land. While the Israeli-Palestinian conflict is complex, Israel has repeatedly sought peace, signing treaties with Egypt and Jordan, and offering solutions that were often rejected. The legitimacy of Israel is unquestionable, and its right to defend itself remains absolute.
Palestine's legitimacy is undeniable. It is the homeland of the Palestinian people, who lived there for centuries before being displaced by colonial forces. The 1947 UN partition plan ignored the will of the Arab majority, dividing their land without their consent. When Israel was created, it led to the Nakba, mass displacement, ethnic cleansing, and the ongoing occupation of Palestinian territories. Palestinians have the right to self-determination and sovereignty, just like any other people. Israel's existence came at the cost of Palestinian dispossession, and its continued expansion into the West Bank and blockade of Gaza prove that this is not just about security, but about domination. True legitimacy is based on justice, and as long as millions of Palestinians remain stateless or under occupation, Israel's legitimacy will remain contested.
The claim that Israel was created through colonial forces ignores historical and legal realities. The Jewish people have an ancient connection to this land, and their return was not a colonial project. It was a national movement for self-determination, legally recognized by the UN in 1947. The partition plan was a fair compromise, offering both Jews and Arabs a state, but Arab leaders rejected it and chose war instead. The Nakba was not ethnic cleansing. It was the result of a war initiated by Arab nations seeking to destroy Israel at birth. Meanwhile, hundreds of thousands of Jews were expelled from Arab lands, yet Israel absorbed them. Why weren't Palestinian refugees absorbed by neighboring Arab states? Israel has made repeated peace offers, Camp David 2000, Taba 2001, and more, all rejected by Palestinian leadership. Israel's legitimacy does not depend on Palestinian acceptance. It is a sovereign state, recognized by the world, with a thriving democracy and an economy that benefits both Israelis and Palestinians. The path forward is coexistence, not delegitimization.
Framing Israel's creation as a fair compromise ignores the reality that Palestinian Arabs, who made up the majority population, had no say in the partition. The UN's 1947 plan imposed an unjust solution, favoring one group over another and disregarding Palestinian sovereignty. When Palestinians resisted, it was not a war of aggression but a defense against forced displacement. The Nakba was indeed ethnic cleansing. Over 700,000 Palestinians were expelled or fled due to massacres like Deir Yassin, with entire villages erased. Meanwhile, Jewish refugees from Arab countries had a state to go to. Palestinians did not. Their lands were seized, and their right to return was denied, leaving millions stateless to this day. Israel's so-called peace offers have always come with conditions that maintain occupation and deny true statehood. Settlements continue to expand, Gaza remains under blockade, and Palestinians live under military rule in the West Bank. Legitimacy isn't just about recognition, it's about justice. And as long as Israel continues to deny Palestinians their rights, its legitimacy will remain a question of power, not fairness.
The argument that the UN partition plan was unjust ignores the fact that Jews also had deep historical ties to the land and accepted a compromise, while Arab leaders outright rejected it. If Palestinian leadership had accepted the plan, there would have been a Palestinian state in 1948 alongside Israel. Instead, they chose war, and the consequences of that decision cannot be blamed solely on Israel. The claim of ethnic cleansing is misleading. The 1948 war was not a one-sided expulsion. It was a conflict in which both sides suffered losses and displacement. Yes, some Palestinians fled or were displaced, but many left at the urging of Arab leaders, expecting to return after an Arab victory. Meanwhile, Jewish refugees from Arab lands, who lost their homes and property, were resettled in Israel, while Palestinians were kept in refugee camps by Arab nations rather than being integrated. As for peace, Israel withdrew from Gaza in 2005, yet instead of peace, it got rockets and terror tunnels. Israel has shown a willingness to negotiate, offering statehood multiple times, but Palestinian leaders have repeatedly rejected those offers, insisting instead on Israel's delegitimization. Israel's legitimacy is not a question of power, it is a reality backed by history, law, and international recognition. The real path forward is mutual recognition and coexistence, not continued rejection.
Arguing that Palestinians should have simply accepted the partition plan ignores the reality that it was imposed on them without their consent. A people should not be forced to accept the loss of their land just because another group also has historical ties to it. The Jewish connection to the land does not erase the fact that Palestinians were the majority population and had lived there for centuries before Zionist immigration increased under British rule. The claim that Palestinians left voluntarily, or at the urging of Arab leaders, has been widely debunked. Massacres, forced expulsions, and deliberate destruction of villages created a refugee crisis that persists to this day. Unlike Jewish refugees, who were granted citizenship in Israel, Palestinians were denied the right to return to their homes. The displacement was not just a consequence of war, it was a systematic effort to create a Jewish majority state. Israel's withdrawal from Gaza did not end the occupation, it turned it into an open-air prison, blockaded and controlled by Israel. Settlement expansion, military checkpoints, and home demolitions in the West Bank show that Israel's goal is not peace but permanent dominance. Israel's legitimacy remains contested because it continues to deny Palestinians basic rights and self-determination. Real coexistence can only happen when Palestinians are given justice, not just recognition, on Israel's terms.
The core issue is not Israel's legitimacy, but the refusal of Palestinian leadership and surrounding Arab nations to accept a Jewish state in any form. Jews did not take the land. They returned to their ancestral homeland, where Jewish communities had lived for millennia alongside Arabs. The partition plan was a fair attempt at compromise, one that Israel accepted, but Arab leaders rejected in favor of war. That decision shaped the conflict far more than any Israeli policy. The Nakba was a tragedy, but it was not a planned ethnic cleansing, it was the result of a war launched against Israel. And let's not forget that Israel absorbed hundreds of thousands of Jewish refugees expelled from Arab countries, while Arab states kept Palestinians in camps instead of integrating them. The conflict could have been resolved decades ago had Palestinian leaders chosen negotiation over rejectionism. Gaza is not an open-air prison, it is governed by Hamas, a terrorist group that prioritizes attacking Israel over improving Palestinian lives. Israel has shown time and again that it wants peace, from the Camp David Accords to the Oslo process to the Gaza withdrawal. The obstacle to peace is not Israel's legitimacy, but the refusal of Palestinian factions to accept any solution that includes a Jewish state. Real justice will come through recognition, coexistence, and a genuine commitment to peace from both sides.
The argument that Israel's legitimacy is not the issue ignores the very heart of the conflict. Palestinians were displaced from their homeland without their consent. The Jewish historical connection to the land does not justify the forced removal of hundreds of thousands of Palestinian families, many of whom still live in refugee camps today, denied the right to return. If the partition plan was truly about fairness, why were Palestinians not given a say in the decision that forever altered their fate? The Nakba was not just a consequence of war, it was the systematic destruction of over 500 Palestinian villages, mass expulsions, and the erasure of an entire society's presence. Meanwhile, the idea that Arab nations should have absorbed Palestinian refugees ignores the simple fact: Palestinians had a home, and they were violently removed from it. Unlike Jewish refugees who became citizens of Israel, Palestinians remained stateless, occupied, and dispossessed. Israel's withdrawal from Gaza in 2005 did not mean true freedom for Palestinians. It meant a blockade, airstrikes, and a continued occupation in all but name. The power imbalance is clear. Israel is the one with the military, the settlements, and control over Palestinian lives. Calling for mutual recognition, while continuing to expand illegal settlements and denying Palestinians basic rights, is not a real peace offer. Justice means self-determination for both peoples. Israel's security cannot come at the cost of Palestinian freedom. The world has recognized the right of Palestinians to a state. Now Israel must recognize it too. The real path forward is an end to occupation, equal rights, and true sovereignty for the Palestinian people.
This debate showcased two well-argued perspectives on one of the most complex and contentious geopolitical conflicts. Here's an analysis of the key strengths and weaknesses of each side's arguments. AI Pro-Israel Strengths. 1. Historical and legal legitimacy. AI effectively used historical claims and international law, particularly the UN Partition Plan of 1947, to justify Israel's creation. 2. Self-determination and survival. Highlighting Israel's ability to survive multiple wars and thrive as a democracy strengthened its legitimacy argument. 3. Peace efforts. AI emphasized Israeli peace offers, e.g., Camp David, Oslo Accords, and Palestinian rejections, painting Israel as the willing negotiator. 4. Security concerns. The argument about Hamas governance in Gaza and Israel's defensive actions made the case that Israel faces ongoing threats. AI weaknesses. 1. Downplaying Palestinian displacement. The claim that the Nakba was not ethnic cleansing and was simply a consequence of war was a weak point, as historical evidence suggests forced expulsions occurred. 2. Ignoring settlements and occupation. AI did not adequately address the impact of Israeli settlements, military occupation, and restrictions on Palestinian territories. 3. One-sided blame. The argument placed most of the blame on Palestinian leadership while minimizing Israel's role in perpetuating the conflict. AI Pro-Palestine Strengths. 1. Colonialism and displacement argument. AI framed Israel's creation as a colonial project that displaced an existing population, which is a powerful moral and historical argument. 2. Nakba and refugee crisis. AI effectively used the Palestinian refugee crisis as evidence of injustice and ethnic cleansing. 3. Critique of Israeli policies. Arguments about occupation, settlements, and military actions provided a strong counter to AI's claim of Israel being solely defensive. 4. Inequality in rights. Highlighting systemic discrimination against Palestinians in Israeli-controlled areas strengthened the argument that Israel's policies contribute to the conflict. AI weaknesses. 1. Ignoring Jewish historical connection. AI did not sufficiently acknowledge the Jewish people's long historical presence and connection to the land, making the argument seem dismissive. 2. Lack of alternative solutions. While critiquing Israeli policies, AI did not propose clear solutions or alternatives to resolve the conflict. 3. Minimizing security threats to Israel. The argument did not adequately address real security concerns, such as Hamas rocket attacks and terrorism. Overall debate assessment. Most persuasive argument. This depends on perspective. AI presented a strong case for Israel's legitimacy using history and international law, while AI highlighted Palestinian suffering and injustices under Israeli policies. Biggest missed opportunity. AI could have acknowledged Jewish historical ties while arguing for Palestinian sovereignty, and AI could have addressed occupation and settlement policies more directly. Best path forward. A synthesis of both arguments suggests that mutual recognition and compromise are necessary. Israel's legitimacy is established, but Palestinian rights and statehood must also be addressed for lasting peace.